Good morning, and thank you for joining us on this fall morning. I'm Julie Halbig, Vice President for Economic and Community Development here at ROI. Just a few housekeeping items before we introduce our guest presenters and dive right into our topic. We are recording the webinar, and it will be available on the ROI website along with the past housing webinar series. But you will also be receiving a link to the recording as well as the slide deck. And we are going to hold questions until the end of the presentation. You will be able to either unmute and ask your question, but please also feel free to add any questions you have to the chat, and we will monitor questions in the chat to have your question answered. With that, I would like to introduce Sherry Seiwert, Program Director, and Kary Long, Finance Manager at the Indiana Finance Authority. Sherry currently serves as the program director at IFA, where she administers the Indiana Residential Infrastructure Fund, or RIF, which you'll be hearing about. Prior to joining IFA, Sherry served nearly a decade as the president and CEO of Downtown Indy, Inc., DII, a not-for-profit organization focused on developing, managing, and marketing downtown Indianapolis. Before DII, Sherry served as the director for the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority for the state of Indiana. And during the past 35 years, Sherry has served in leadership roles, including working as an administrator for the city of Indianapolis, as well as director for the Local Initiative Support Corporation. And Sherry currently serves on the boards of Horizon House and the Volunteers of America, Indiana, and Ohio. Kary Long is currently the finance manager for the Residential Housing Infrastructure Assistance Program. He assists in the review and underwriting process of the program and working with various municipal advisors and communities around Indiana. Kary joined IFA in 2019, previously working as a finance assistant for the State Revolving Fund for 3.5 years. Prior to that, he was the disbursement coordinator for SRF for 2 years. Kary attended Indiana University, Kelley School of Business, Indianapolis, where he received a degree in business with a concentration in finance. Thank you both so much for being with us and providing an overview for the Residential Infrastructure Fund. We look forward to hearing more about this new program and how our communities in the region might consider utilizing this funding. And with that, I will attempt to, always the hardest part of the webinar, right, is sharing the slides, even though we're many years into this now. So Sherry and Kary, I will turn it over to you. Let me share my screen and start our slide deck here.
That is great. Thank you, Julie. I really appreciate that warm introduction. And as you mentioned, I am joined by my colleague, Kary Long. For those of you who are not familiar with the Residential Infrastructure Fund, or RIF, it was created, it was actually the state legislature awarded funding to initiate the loan program in 2023. And so this past year, we have started working on putting the fund together, the actual structure of the fund, the logo, all of the website. And so the PowerPoint that we'll be talking about is on our website, as well as the current application. But the purpose of the fund was, many developers around the state have been talking about the increase in the cost of developing housing, particularly infrastructure. And so the state legislature decided to award initially $50 million to launch this loan fund. And the idea of the fund is that a political subdivision or a municipality would actually borrow the money from IFA to finance the infrastructure installation, so that in effect it keeps the cost of residential housing down. So as you see that on the first slide, that's really the purpose of the program. And so, initially $50 million was awarded, and then we currently have another $25 million available through this current application round. Next slide. So the uses of the fund, this gives you an idea of what public infrastructure means. So an eligible project includes the installation, replacement, upgrade, or improvement of public infrastructure for the support of additional residential housing. So in our past application round, most of the applicants were wanting water and sewer lines, as well as roads and sidewalks made available before they broke ground on the residential housing. We did get a couple of upgrades to wastewater treatment plants in small communities. And so we're still looking at working on those and the way that we can finance those. Next slide. I lose you, Julie. The fund is created so that 70% of the awards go to local municipalities that have a population of less than 50,000, and the remainder go to those municipalities that have greater than 50,000. And fortunately, in this last round, we had almost exactly that amount of funding requests for rural areas, and then same with urban areas. So we're anxious to see how this goes in this upcoming round. Go ahead. So in thinking about how a community is eligible, we would want to see a market study. So a residential market study showing that you're demonstrating the need for additional housing. I will say that there is no income cap. So it really is the housing, the cost of a price point of the housing is what the community determines its need. For instance, some communities have large companies that are looking to locate within their area, and so they really need a wider variety of price points to meet the needs of those incoming employees or potential hires. We also want to know the type of infrastructure that will be required for the development of the housing. So we want to go into some detail with that, as well as really just describing the overall development. So talk to us if it's a single family development, if it's a multifamily development, are there going to be, different phases? So we really want in the narrative to go into a good amount of detail about the overall development that you're proposing. On the prioritization, so when we're scoring an application, we'd like to be able to see that you are ready to move forward with construction within 6 months after we close the loan. We'll also, again, I mentioned the housing study. We would want you to be able to show us that you have completed a housing study within the last 5 years. So that could be completed by a consultant, or you can go on IHCDA's website, and we've put a link here, and really put together the information that we're asking for. And you'll, if you do decide to make an application, you will see that there's a list of what should be included in that study. So if you decide to use IHCDA's website, we have listed along in our application everything that would be required for that. We do want to see that the political subdivision has volunteer revised their any sort of development ordinances or regulations. We have found that some counties don't even have any development regulations or ordinances, so you won't receive any negative scoring as a result of that. But ideally, the political subdivision has revised the ordinances to allow for a variety of different types of housing, maybe on a smaller footprint. So again, as you look at the application, you'll see a whole list of revised development ordinances, and you can check the box if your political subdivision has done any of that. We'd like to be able to see that there have been additional funding sources that will contribute to the project. So leverage is an important component of this, as well as a repayment source for the loan, the RIF loan. And from here, I'm going to ask Kary to talk a little bit more about the interest rate and the payment, the potentials of repayments.
Thank you, Sherry. So one of the first things I wanted to mention was that the municipality will be required to issue the bond. And so it will be a 20-year term with a fixed interest rate throughout the life of the loan. All traditional utility projects will follow the standard SRF interest rate matrix, if you're familiar with our state revolving fund program, and all other projects will be eligible for the highest interest rate on that SRF matrix. All applicants should assume that the first interest payments will be due on February or August 1st after they close the loan. And capitalized interest is allowed. I guess I'll segue that into our repayment sources or repayment terms. So with that, we have a new TIF, an existing TIF, user net revenues, developer repayments, or some other source of repayment. So to differentiate between the new TIF and the existing TIF, we classify an existing TIF as a TIF that's earning or has 5 years of consecutive historical revenue. So if it doesn't have that, then it'll be classified as a new TIF under our requirements. With that new TIF, we will require it to have 1.25 of coverage, and it'll also have a taxpayer agreement. That'll be an agreement between the municipality and the developer. And that agreement is just essentially saying that the developer will make up any shortfalls of TIF, if there's any TIF, shortfalls in TIF revenues to pay down that debt service on the RIF loan. A new TIF will also be required to have a debt service reserve fund. It'll be sized at the maximum annual debt service. It can be on deposit at closing. If it is not, then we will require that the applicant submit a semi-annual transfer schedule that'll essentially have the excess TIF revenues funding that reserve to the required amount. As I mentioned, capitalized interest is allowed. So since it's a new TIF, there's not a lot of revenue coming in those first couple of years. So capitalized interest will be allowed for about the first 3 years. Either that or the developer can pay that interest on those first payments. As far as the existing TIF, again, it's if it has 5 years of historical revenue, then we will classify that as an existing TIF. We will require 5 years of historical TIF revenues to be included in that analysis, and the 10 largest taxpayers for that allocated area. Moving on to the utility net revenues. That'll just essentially follow the traditional SRF matrix. So again, if you're familiar with that program, it'll also be required to have 1.25 coverage and also debt service reserve. So essentially the new TIF and the utility net revenues or the user fees will be the only two, as of now, repayment sources that will have a reserve required. The utility net revenues, those can be funded over a 60-month period, so a monthly transfer schedule. And also going back to the existing TIF, I wanted to point out that we'll only accept a senior or parity position if it has any other existing obligations. You guys can also pledge the developer to be the sole source of repayment. With that, there will be a letter of credit, and a draft letter of credit can be provided. It's recommended that the developer go over that as soon as possible, along with the taxpayer agreement, if they're going to be signing that, if you guys are pledging a new TIF, just so that they know what they're signing, getting into. Um, and if there's any other repayment sources, you guys can just include that in the on the application in the analysis with that as well. These requirements with more detail are listed on the application. So in Exhibit 2 of the application, it'll have these requirements listed there, or it's linked a couple of times on our webpage called Source of Security and Repayment Terms that'll have these requirements on there as well. As far as accessing the funds, once we close the loan, we will also follow that traditional disbursement process. So again, going back to SRF, we will have our own disbursement form that's also linked on our webpage. And the municipality will fill that out and submit that to us, and then it should be a general 2-week time frame between submittal and payment to the vendor or the municipality if it's for a reimbursement. You go to the next slide. Sure, if you wanted to.
Yeah, before we move on, I just wanted, for those of you who may not be familiar with the term CAPI or capitalized interest, essentially what it means is you would ask for a greater loan than what the cost of the project is. You're borrowing money from us to pay us back, essentially. So that's the interest, if you're not familiar with that term. And also on the actual interest rate, when we talk about SRF, the current rate is generally around, Kary, 2.5% right now?
2.5% to 3%. Yeah, it's beneath 3%, so about 2.5%.
And if a developer were to go to a conventional lender, it would probably hover around 8%. So that's the cost savings that I mentioned that makes the overall project more affordable. And actually, Kary, can you walk through this? I'm embarrassed to say it's too small for me to read. You have better eyes than I do.
Yes, let me load up myself as well.
This is essentially the process. We just want folks to know, kind of as we walk through the process, these are the steps that you would anticipate. And hopefully, we definitely want to talk about just making sure that you understand the municipality and the issuance of a bond.
Yes. So this process is also listed on our webpage. So just to kind of go through it, the first step would be the community would submit a RIF application, and our application is online. So we have a link on our webpage. And with the application that's linked online, you do have to submit the answers before you can go to the next page. So we do have a PDF version of the application that is listed in our program information section on our website. And it does have a link to go back to the electronic version of that. We do require it to be completed electronically though. After the municipality submits their application, the IFA will review that application and any supporting documentation. We will place that on a priority list and rank and score those applications. We will then make awards. So we'll contact you via email and let you know of the award, and we'll set up an initial meeting with each community to go over those initial financing guidelines and any questions or initial questions that you guys may have. Going up to that top middle section, or no, sorry, to the right. Bidding must be completed and received prior to closing the loan. So as far as the due diligence, it's mostly just, I guess, an analysis that'll be done essentially most likely by your municipal advisor, which we do recommend you guys have a municipal advisor to complete those for you guys. The community will complete a pre-closing with the IFA, and then pre-closing will be 2 weeks before the official closing date. And then going back to the interest, those will begin within 6 months of the loan closing. The project will be constructed and the loan is going to be drawn down, and principal payments will begin within 12 months of substantial completion of the project. And the next slide.
And these are just the recent changes that we've made to the current application. We put a formula together just to give you an idea on an overall cost basis. So if you're thinking about doing a multifamily development project, probably think 15,000 per unit on the multifamily side. If it's a single family development, 25,000. So that again, it gives you the overall kind of cost associated with what you might ask for. If we're saying that applicants, if you've already got 2 active projects in the hopper, that you won't score as high. For instance, this past round, Clarksville was awarded 2 applications, so for them to come in for a third would not likely score very high. And then lastly, we'd like to see engineering plans approved by a professional engineer so that we understand that the costs have been looked at. We have a couple of projects that did their plans post application and are seeing that the cost is much greater than what they had anticipated. So we'd like to at least be able to see that the reasonable costs have already been looked at. And with that, Julie, I will stop and we are open for questions.
Wonderful. No, thank you. I'll stop. I know when we had talked previously, so thank you for mentioning that there's a PDF version of the application so that communities that might be interested can kind of see in advance, what all they need to prepare or consider before they do the electronic application. We had a few questions. One, I know that we had shared with you that ROI had done a 2019 housing study, as well as we have just done a 2023 update to that study. And included in that study was not only a summary of the region, but also a breakout of each county in our region. And just wanted to confirm that something like that would qualify as a housing study, since it has been not only done, but updated in the last 5 years. And we do have that county by county detail.
Yes, that would be sufficient for us, particularly since it's county by county. If the county does decide to apply or again, a local municipality within that county, that should be sufficient.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then another question that we had in the chat is, since this is under IFA and not OKRA, should we assume that there is no income survey required?
That is correct. So no, again, there is no affordability component to this. We would look at kind of determining the interest rate. We would take the income into account, but you wouldn't need to submit that, or the applicant would need to submit that. And I would also say, because these are state funds, there is no Davis-Bacon associated with it. So I think that's also beneficial for the overall project.
And then I know when we had spoken earlier, we had, and you touched on this, and just wanted to confirm for everybody, many of our counties, communities are more rural and don't have developed zoning and so forth. And so, so I think I heard you say in the presentation that doesn't count against you, so to speak, as far as your application, and that you aren't required to proceed down that path, I guess.
Right. No, if there are no development ordinances or language in place, then it actually positions you better. So wouldn't even again, in our scoring criteria, you won't be negatively scored.
Okay. Another thing that I know in preparation for this, and you were sharing with people in our communities about the program, you've had your first round of applications. And so one, kind of what is an ideal fit project for these loans? And also, to what extent can IFA be loan funding, or is there any sort of grant funding component to this as well?
Unfortunately, there isn't currently any grant funding associated with it. So, we'd love to hear from folks. We're still in this initial phase of what I think of as discovery. So we learned a lot after the first round of applications. And, we're open to hearing from folks. This is really what it would take for me to, or our organization to get this project off the ground. And so don't hesitate to reach out to Kary and I directly, just to say, here's what we would really need. And so, if we don't currently have grant money, but if in fact that's really, if there's a little piece that you really need to get it done, let us know that, and we'll do our darndest to try and make it work. So, I think about while the current $25 million fund or tranche of funding is sitting in the bank, it's accruing interest. And so, there is a little bit, maybe there's some flexibility with that interest that's accruing that we could use or something. Again, it's not currently set up for grants, but I'm a creative thinker, so I am more than happy to listen to anything that folks want to propose. So, and you said, what's an ideal project? I mean, I think it really is, I can describe what we've seen in some of our, in at least the past round or what we're hearing. Some of these are developer driven. Even though the political subdivision has to be the applicant, a lot of times the developer goes to the city of X and says, I have this parcel that I own, this 40-acre parcel. If you all apply for this infrastructure, I can build 100, 200 new homes. The local municipality really has to be on board with that. What we have seen, if it's developer driven, the municipality is sometimes less inclined to take on any sort of risk associated with taking a loan out. So, if the municipality is saying we desperately need housing, and they have a developer in mind, or if they already have a parcel of land, or they, maybe have one in their sites, that tends to work a little bit better if it's municipality driven. But a lot of times, the developer will be willing to take on more risk. And when Kary was kind of talking through this, we've seen a lot of municipalities with create the new TIF, the new residential TIF. And as he mentioned, with the new residential TIF, we won't start seeing a significant accrual until probably year 3, once the project is actually up, it's been developed, and it's generating property tax revenue. So in those first couple of years, there won't be a repayment source. And so many municipalities are saying to the developer, you sign this taxpayer agreement, and if there isn't sufficient revenue to pay to cover that TIF shortfall, then we want you to do it. And that's when the developer goes, I'm not going to do it. And the municipality says, well, we're not going to do it. So, we want to make sure that everybody goes in eyes wide open with how they structure these loans going forward.
And would you say, the successful communities during the first round, can you kind of walk us through maybe the most rural that you saw from those?
Sure. Yeah. There's Churubusco, Ossian, they are, sorry, we had 13 applications, so I always have to think through exactly what was in each one. Most of those are single family developments, and they might be, I don't know, around 50 units. Kary's probably digging out the details on it, but again, parcel of land, just didn't have any existing infrastructure there. for what the developer thinks they can sell that house for, they're going to need to have as much assistance as they can.
Right.
And so, you know, if it already comes with the infrastructure installed and the municipality willing to take on that loan, you know, that brings their price point down probably to a point where they think they can build it and sell it for whatever that market is.
No, that's very helpful. You know, once a community kind of takes a look at the application, if they have questions, should they reach out, just kind of email both of you and then whoever's appropriate to answer?
Kary's more reliable than I am, but by all means.
Okay.
Yeah, either one of us, we're synonymous at this point. So yeah, feel free to reach out to one or both of us. That would be fine. And Julie, you had another question about, I apologize, you emailed us in advance.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to confirm that only political subdivisions that own or control their own municipal
That was it.
infrastructure are eligible to apply. Is that, am I reading that correct, or?
You are. So they,
Okay.
again, it has to be a political subdivision that makes the application. If in fact they don't, you know, control their infrastructure, they could have a separate agreement with that entity that they
Okay.
are going to, you know, not own the infrastructure, but they would still be on the hook for the loan.
I
Does
see.
that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
But I'm sure that we could come up with a language that would work between the partnership that it can get done.
Okay. Yeah, and I know that, you know, probably some of our communities, you know, if they are interested in applying, they need to reach out to you and kind of discuss in advance, you know, and get some specific questions answered to their unique situation. Do you anticipate that there are going to be 2 application cycles per state fiscal year, or how's that going to work?
I think we will likely just have one after this. We just, you know, initially had the $50 million tranche and then a second 25 million. So we will likely start having them, I would guess, probably July 1, August 1 of each year. It's a bummer because that kind of puts us behind the construction season, but we intend to go back to the state legislature each year and ask for an additional request. So by the time that funding would get appropriated, that's about the time frame it would put us at.
Okay. And we've had a few more additional questions come in, so thank you to everyone. So just want to confirm, so a county government would have to be the applicant for a regional sewer district, for example, I'm assuming?
Yeah, and my apologies. I'm not a utilities expert, so I don't know exactly how they work in different portions of the state. There is a definition of a political subdivision and within the guidelines that we have on our posted. I mean, it could be a school district, it could be an RDA, it could be, I mean, there are a variety of entities that fall within the definition of a political subdivision. So I would just take a look at that and see what makes the most sense. And we can always ask our legal counsel.
Okay. Another question that came in is, so if a wastewater treatment facility needed to upgrade versus expanding, but it's in furtherance of a housing development, how would that be? Would that fall within the eligibility for this fund?
So we have agreed to do 2 upgrades to wastewater. One is a very rural, small community, and one is a larger one, but neither one of them they were at capacity and they couldn't develop any more housing without upgrading their system. And so, but for us, Kary gets tired of hearing me say this, we don't want to fund a sidewalk to nowhere. So you do have to have some housing development associated with that. So if you're going to upgrade that, you need to say, because we have a development, you know, within its, you know, X proximity, and that's why we need to do it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, no, that's
Okay.
good to know. So I think, the key thing and that's helpful for me to realize, because I don't think I realized an upgrade could potentially be possible. Um, not just an expansion, but again, just kind of talk to both of you probably in advance and
Yes.
discuss the specifics, and no, that's very good to know. And then one other quick question that came in is the 20-year requirement required for the loan, or can it be a shorter period?
It could be a shorter period.
It can be, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, great. Um, any other kind of helpful tips or things to consider, again, after I know you learned so much during that very first round of applicants, that communities should just go in thinking about and knowing. I know kind of the timing is interesting, that I think, in the guidelines, it talks about, being pretty ready to move with the project. Any other details that kind of stick out from successful applicants for this program?
Yeah, I would say, as much as you have have in place, and provide us as much detail as you can in advance. And so, again, we're still fine tuning our scoring based on this past round and kind of what's important. But really whatever your community needs is what we want to try to help you meet. So trying to think of, Kary, can you think of anything that?
I cannot.
Okay. Yeah, the applications are due December 13th. So, you've got a couple of months. And so we're available. I will say we already know that a couple of our loans are not going to move forward from this first round. So that money will go into our current funding round. So we'll have a little bit more than 25 million.
Great. No, thank you for taking us through, Kary, all the financing options that communities can consider as well, and those requirements. We really appreciate. Sherry, did you have anything
I was
to?
just going to say, and don't feel like you have to be a finance wizard. Kary and I have learned a lot through this process, and so it sounds really complicated when we describe it. Don't hesitate to reach out to us and even say, "What's a TIF? What a tax increment finance, or what's a LOC, a letter of credit, and how does that work?" So by all means, don't if you don't already know about those. Different types of financing components, please feel free to reach out to us.
Well, and I really appreciate your comment about the willingness to have consideration of, if based on what you've heard today and those current, guidelines, parameters don't seem to be able to quite get your community um, to the point where it could be maybe a successful applicant. Let's not continue the conversation, so to speak. And so I appreciate that offer very much, because since it is a new program created by the legislature, and implementation in a first year is always fun business, I know, for any state agency. So that is very much appreciated. And, for those on the call, if there's specific feedback that, maybe we all need to consider as a region to give to Sherry and Kary, please feel free to do that. We will include Sherry and Kary's contact information as well when we send out the follow-up recording and slides. But I just want to thank you both very much for the dialogue that we've had one-on-one, but also with all of our attendees today, and sharing this valuable information. And like I said, to watch all of the ROI Uplands housing sessions, please feel free to go to our website at regionalopportunityinc.org/housing series. So thank you everyone for the great questions. And thank you both again for sharing this great information with our region. We appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Have a great day.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Yeah.
Bye.